let me start with you and put up actually a chart that shows what's happened to the profitability of an agricultural business in recent years, which is not a pretty picture, a backdrop for this trade dispute. The farmers were not doing so well already.
Yeah, farmers are already looking at a potential 12-year low in profits, and that's the most recent USDA forecast. Now, that was made in February, before farmers even planted. Farmers may be compounding some of the problems this year. We just found out last week that farmers actually planted more soybeans than corn. For the first time in 35 years, they decided that was the crop they were going to plow their investments into. It may be a bad bet, given what we're seeing with China right now.
So, Professor Ribeiro, let's turn to you. You're an expert in agricultural economics. What is the problem with the U.S. farmer, and are they headed in the wrong direction?
Well, thank you for having me first. And yes, it is a big problem because about 1/3 of U.S. farm income comes from our agricultural exports. So whenever we have a trade war, whenever there's some disruption on trade, then producers are going to get affected, and usually it's in a negative way. So these talks with China, the European Union, as well as renegotiating NAFTA, plays it's bad for agricultural production here in the U.S.
Luis, the problem is, and we've been talking about this throughout the show, you have to separate action and what we're really seeing in terms of actual tariffs versus just the threats of what might come. And even if we see nothing here, the uncertainty as far as agricultural pricing is concerned is huge. And that has an impact on what farmers do going forward, what they plant, what they don't plant. Just talk about the impact that you see it already having in terms of pure uncertainty.
Sure. I mean, when you look at the future prices for commodities, doesn't matter if it's just a thread, they're going to react to it. And we have stories from producers here in Texas, corn producers specifically, that just because corn prices were down by 1 bushel, he lost about $10,000 to $15,000. So it doesn't matter if it's just a thread or it's just just talks about tariffs or any trade issue. The markets are going to react, and producers are going to be affected by it.
So, Alan, just take soybeans, for example. If China doesn't buy them from us, who are they going to buy them from? Is it Brazil? And if we can't sell them to China, who are we going to sell them to?
So you've seen this big ramp up in recent weeks and months of Chinese purchases of soybeans from Brazil. They've been preparing for this, and that should get them through the third quarter of the year. The issue is Brazil has a different harvest season than the United States, and so in the fourth quarter, China's going to be looking for U.S. soybeans again. There's some speculation that they may still buy some U.S. soybeans anyway, despite the tariffs. That's going to be a huge shock on Chinese consumers as they pass on the cost, but it could happen. Meanwhile, the United States has to look for other buyers. The European Union, of course, could be a big market for U.S. soybeans, but you're not going to replace China. It's simply the biggest destination for soybeans on Earth. It is a mainstay of their cooking. And even if you sell to the EU, we're having trade problems there, too. They may not be the world's most willing buyer.
So, Professor, what about it? We just put up a chart that actually shows the extent to which China is buying a lot more soybeans right now from Brazil than they have the last 2 years. Can they take care of their problems simply by ramping up in Brazil and other places?
Well, probably in the short run, I think because of the growing seasons, they're going to come back to U.S. soybeans, but eventually they're going to look for other suppliers. We've worked on a project with Brazil. We call it Brazil 2040, where we look at Brazil forward, looking at agricultural production, the expansion in several other commodities, as well as some as a market for U.S. products. And boy, Brazil, they can double their cropland and be more of a major player. They are already a major player. We compete directly with many of the products that we produce for the international market, namely soybean, beef, pork, poultry, corn. So they're happy with this news, and because they think that they can get a higher market share from the world.
How able is China to go, you know what, we're going to order mass planting of these kind of products? How quickly can they get far greater independence? The beauty of a command economy here, Luis.
I don't think that that is feasible. Their agricultural frontier is pretty much maxed out. They can make some switch, on their crop rotation or crop portfolio, but they depend on the world market, and it's an economic decision as well. The reason that they don't produce all the soybeans and they're independent, that they can produce everything that they need. It's because they don't have the resources, and they import quite a bit. They import a lot of soybeans from mainly Brazil and the U.S., and they're going to continue to do that. It's an economic decision, and it works best for them that way.
Alan, very quickly, I mean, the bedrock of the vote that got President Trump to the White House was the Farm Belt and these rural communities. How material are we talking about the damage right now and the fears that they face translating to votes in the midterms?
So farmers know their history, Julia, and I'll take you back to 1980 when the U.S. put a grain embargo on the Soviet Union. It was devastating for farm incomes. It was followed by a wave of foreclosures, and there was a lot of concern in farm country and some political backlash. Now, this time we're dealing with South America. In 1980, South American production rose for the first time because of it. Now we're taking a look at where U.S. farmers may have to rethink some of their concern and some of their support for the president in the future if indeed this policy has the material effect of making South America great again.